the International Day for Poverty Eradication, while October 16 was the World Food Day. Obviously, both of these days hold extreme importance for Pakistan and the developing world and are at the core of sustainable development goals. We all know that SDG 1 and 2 address poverty and hunger eradication in the developing world. Yet, as we speak, 21.9% of Pakistan's population is living below the national poverty line, which is at anyone who is earning below rupees 3,740. For context, that is $17 per month is poor. So that definition is obviously unreal. And it indicates that naturally a much larger chunk of Pakistan population is living in extreme poverty. And now they fear that approximately 15 million more Pakistanis will fall under poverty due to flash floods in various parts of the country. This, though, is not the only problem which is induced by the climate catastrophe. Over 30 million Pakistani people have been displaced, and the communities are facing an epidemic of various waterborne diseases and food security issues, which are causing a $40 billion loss to the economy of the country. These are some serious issues, and to discuss these, we have an esteemed panel today, which comprises of Mr. Kaye, Country Director, World Food Programme. Mr. Kaye has 29 years experience in organizational and strategic policy development, coordination and operational management of humanitarian and development assistance. In his career, he has worked in countries that include Afghanistan, Kenya, India, Myanmar, Philippines, Rwanda, and the list is long. We have Mr. Farooq Tuero, Deputy Representative, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. He has worked in Tajikistan, his home country, Chechnya, Kyrgyzstan, Somalia, and Ukraine, and as a country director, World Bank in Tajikistan as well. We are immensely honored to have you here with us today. We also have Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan, Chairman, Rural Support Program Network, and also one of the founders of STPI. He initiated the Aga Khan Rural Support Program in 1982 and afterwards steered various programs in Pakistan, India, and South Asia, touching millions of lives in the rural areas. And it's a privilege to have with us. In fact, we would be joined shortly by Dr. Iqrar Ahmed Khan, Vice Chancellor, University of Agriculture, Faisalabad. He would be joining us online. He's a recipient of Sitare-e-Imtiaz. And the Higher Education Commission has conferred upon the title of Distinguished National Professor to Professor Dr. Iqrar for 2 years in recognition of his services in the field of education and research. We'd also be joined by Dr. Fateh Mari, Vice Chancellor, Sindh Agriculture University, Tandojam. Dr. Mari is an academic and researcher. He's a fellow of South Asian Network for Development and Environmental Economics, USA, and Green Economic Institute, Oxford University. We are joined here by Mr. Irshad Khan Abbasi, who is the Head Innovation and Integration Pakistan Poverty Elevation Fund. We will first go to Dr. Abid Suleri, our Executive Director, for his opening remarks, and then we'll come to our panel for further discussion on the subject.
Thank you very much, distinguished panelists, and especially, of course, I'm happy to have all of you, but I'm extremely happy to see Shoaib Sultan Khan Sahab. I think it's after COVID I've seen him in any of the event in person. So thank you very much, sir, for.
Well, you were invited.
Thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, today's discussion basically, as Aisha said, around Poverty Eradication Day and around World Food Day, but most importantly in the context of floods as well. And looking at the theme of Poverty Eradication Day today, it's a dignity for all, and that reminds me how can we take care of people's dignity while carrying out our rehabilitation and recovery efforts. And I think it's a long haul when we talk of rehabilitation and recovery while preserving the dignity of people. Today, while we are talking, 8 million people, they are displaced. Out of them, only 600,000, they are in camps. Rest of them, they are somewhere either surrounded in water under open sky. And of course, the major issue that one worries about them is the oncoming winter. Then we also know that out of the 33 million affected, 16 million are children, children who are now most of them deprived of their nourishment, deprived of their essential vaccines. We also know that people, they have lost their livelihoods. Millions of acres of crops, they have submerged. And we will listen from the experts their initial estimates. But of course, with the failure of cotton, sugarcane, and rice crop and other vegetable crops, livelihood have become difficult. Earning livelihood has become difficult. And with this, we also need to look at the public sector and societal response towards this recovery and rehabilitation. Whether our responses, they take care of dignity of flood survivors or they don't. And at macro level, we also need to see that when Pakistan demands for support for these flood survivors, whether international community is treating us in a dignified manner or not. So at micro, meso, macro level, at all level, when we talk of dignity for all, I think the flood survivors in Pakistan, they present an ideal case study of how not to deal with the poverty eradication that compromises the dignity of the affected communities. I'm sure that while listening to the presentations from the two UN organizations, PPF and of course Shoaib Sultan Khan Saab's wonderful work on community mobilization and eradication of poverty in a dignified manner, perhaps we will be able to come up with some lessons and policy recommendations for the government, that how government and international community, they can take care of flood survivors in Pakistan. I'll conclude with one last aspect, and that is, we know that the world is passing through difficult times. The World Bank's economic outlook, as regional economic outlook, as well as IMF's global economic outlook, if one can think of a common strand from these two reports, it says that we are in a perfect storm. We are in a perfect storm. We are affected by a CCC crisis, by conflict, by climate change, by COVID-19. And all of them, their compound effect is that poverty after almost a decade after almost a decade of decline is on increase. It started increasing after COVID, and now with this conflict and climate change, its rise is unabated, especially in the countries like Pakistan. And we need to think that what are the old and new challenges that can be dealt either through some proven practices or through some out-of-box solutions. But we have to address these issues, keeping in mind that the dignity of survivors, that should not be affected. I look forward to hear your words of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. These indeed were some very pertinent questions, and we hope to find some answers, at least in the further discussion. We will begin with Mr. Irshad Abbasi. So your profile mentioned expertise in pre and post-disaster emergencies, and right now we are faced with a disaster of vast proportions, with wide range and long-lasting implications for our human security. The World Bank has also expressed fears of even more people falling below poverty line. How do you see this situation as part of Poverty Elevation Fund?
First of all, thank you very much, Aisha, Sulari Saab, and everybody for inviting me for such an important topic, which is the food security and poverty alleviation. To me, being the son of soil, it's a very crucial topic, not crucial for the development workers, but also for the political janta. And everybody knew in this hall that food insecurity usually not only lead to the poor health conditions, low productivity, but it's also create a situation of instability, not only in the country, but in the region. So Pakistan is fifth, the most affected country in the world. Some say seventh, some say fifth, but between fifth and seventh. And somehow, if you all agree, this is now the fate of Pakistan, that we have to face those disasters in one form or another form. But what are our preparedness as far as mitigation and adaptation is concerned? I think that's a serious question, which is in front of us for the development practitioners and for the politicians to really work on that. Yes, there are some very successful cases around. I remember while working with the Aga Khan Foundation, we had a wonderful work in Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral, where we were working on community-based response teams. And still I'm the advocate here in the PTA that unless until the forefront communities, either the village organization or the hamlet level community organization, they are not prepared for the responses, which can be search, rescue, and then relief and rehabilitation through their own skill development, to their own efforts. This cannot be resolved simply with the grants and aid from international community or from a national exchequer. So, in short, in crux, I mean, Pakistan is 92nd country out of 116 countries on the Global Hunger Index. And we were so proud that in 2015, we halved the poverty ratio from 57 to 24.3%. Now, again, with these two disasters, COVID and the current flood, now again, it's risen to almost 35.7% in 2022. So similarly, inflation goes, similarly disruption of the agriculture and livestock value chains, and ultimately the price hikes and life for Pakistanis. Currently I can see in terms of the price hike, general inflation is beyond imagination. So my point here is that we have to have a good response to those disasters in terms of preparedness, and especially at the communities level. And second, our approach should be multidimensional. It should not be simply responding or reactionary, a kind of approach to any disaster. But it could be a long-term planning where we can have we can triangulate with strengthening our communities, with the provision of financial asset and physical asset in terms of the poverty graduation programs. But also, we have to have emphasis on very important element, which unfortunately is still struggling in Pakistan, that is insurances. It could be the crop insurances, it could be the livestock insurances, etc. So this is a brief crux from my side. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With this, I would go towards Mr. Farooq Toero. So I'm assuming as a part of FAO, a subsidiary of UN, you are closely observing the situation. And as Mr. Ishaq mentioned, with this rise in inflation and the prices of commodities, how do you see the current scenario post-flood and post-COVID as well? How do you see this affecting Pakistan's overall progress towards the attainment of its SDG goals, particularly the SDG 2 under eradication?
Thank you very much. Thanks for CBI colleagues for organizing this event. Very timely, around the corner of 16th of October is the World Food Day and 17th of October, where the purpose of this day is being to highlight the importance of food security around the world, and also the poverty, and B, with the people who are suffering from this phenomenon already in many countries. In fact, Pakistan is not exception, but Pakistan being populated with a significant number of people, like 220 million people, is also home for a large number of food insecure and poor. And therefore, the importance of these events in Pakistan are quite significant. And then, as previous speakers mentioned, the ongoing flood situation in the country is adding to the already pre-existing systemic issues where there was a significant number of food insecure in the country. Like, according to the data collected, around 15 to 16% of the population were moderately or severely food insecure even before the flood situation occurred. And then during the flood, whereby, according to the data from the assessment conducted by FAO using satellite imagery, about 9.5 million acres of farming land was inundated by floodwater. Of course, it doesn't mean that the entire area has been damaged, but at least the water levels have reached these 9.5 million acres of land, which is a significant part in the 4 provinces in Sindh, south of Punjab, Balochistan, and KT. And majority of this area, those farming areas, are used for both cycles of Kharif production and Rabi crop cultivation. According to the government data, about 4.5 million acres of that land has received some level degree of the damages for the standing crops of the Kharif season. So that means the poor farmers who engage in agriculture production during the Kharif season did not receive the income that they wanted to have for the preparing for their Rabi plantation season. Therefore, the significant number of such households in need of assistance now to be supported with their Rabi crop production. Because as you all know, it is only during the Rabi season in Pakistan when wheat is cultivated, the major staple crop of the country. Kharif crops were affected, but luckily it was not wheat crop, because during the Kharif there are other crops like cash crops and other food commodity crops that are cultivated. So the wheat was already harvested before the onset of the flood situation. But what we had at the pre-flood situation, again, this year's wheat harvest was not as good as the previous year. Of course, the previous year in 2021, we had a bumpy crop. But in 22, we did not have a bumpy crop. And then the government was already planning to import at least 3 to 4 million tons of wheat to compensate the sort of missing part of the not received harvest in the farming cycle, but also making sure that the reserves will be retained for the following years. And that is at the time when, because of the flood situation, now we have significant number of small-scale farmers who lost their stocks of the seeds, in this case, even wheat seed, due to the flood. The biggest storages of the seeds and crops will, of course, try to be saved by the government successfully. But then the smaller scale storages where the farmers will keep in their backyards for cultivation, in many cases were lost. And therefore, farmers need that assistance to be able to effectively cultivate their land during the Rabi crop. Now, another factor is the fertilizers. The fertilizers availability and accessibility, unfortunately, was again deteriorating even before the flood situation. As of July, our data shows that at least 34% reduction in the use of the DAP fertilizer in Pakistan compared to the previous year. So between 2021 July, 22 July, the consumption, utilization of the DAP fertilizer has already been reduced. Why? Because of the high prices. The international prices for the DAP has risen significantly, up to $950 a ton, slightly reduced now to about $750 per metric ton. But that is in comparison with the previous years, when in 2020, for example, it was only $250, $300. So if you compare that $750 of international price converted to PKR, to Pakistani rupees, with the current exchange rate, you will understand how difficult it is for the farmers to be able to pay for that fertilizer. And now, during the Rabi season, if that fertilizer is not made available to the farmers along with the seeds, then the possibility of significant reduction of the harvest for the next harvesting season is very significant. And again, wheat is cultivated now during the very short window of time, during October, November, and latest by December. And that's the only time when the farmers can cultivate it. And if this window of opportunity is lost, then the next year harvest is at risk. Of course, we're only talking about the flood-affected areas, but then even the areas which are not affected by flood, they are suffering from the high cost of the farming inputs. The urea fertilizer is sort of widely available in Pakistan, luckily because of local production, but even there, the prices had to be increased because the international prices for all the fertilizers had increased. And then retaining the lower price in Pakistan was difficult because the risk of smuggling increases, and then that will not benefit the country. So that is all making it difficult for the farmers to, especially in the flood-affected areas, to meet the challenges of the current Rabi season planting, which is a common concern for all of us, including us in FAO and also the government. Of course, the government is doing their program also to address the issue, but the scale of the issue is quite significant, which requires joint efforts. And therefore, having the forums like today where we would come up with the discussions around the topic and then go into details of seeing what are the issues, what is the scale of those issues, what kind of risks we are anticipating, and what needs to be done, what recommendations could be made for all the stakeholders, including the government, but also international organizations and also donor community, how to help the Pakistani farmers who are victims of the climate change situation in the country and facing the issues of flood this year, how to help them to overcome this difficult situation now to avoid possible larger scale implications of the next year. Let me stop here.
Has Dr. Murray joined us? We talked about preemptive responses, and Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan has a vast experience of preemptively responding to the needs of the time, the changing times. We also talked about long-term planning, and rural support is a part of long-term planning. In the recent year, Pakistan has put a lot of focus on poverty alleviation through programs like BIS, PAN-EHSAS, and even Kamyab Jawan. Do you see them paying off anytime soon? And if not, where are we lagging behind despite our massive spending on the programs?
What is your intention, Aisha? No, I'm not going to criticize the government. I only tell you that what we have been doing and why, so that these questions which you're asking would not have been asked. But the poverty is at the household level. And unless and until we reach the household, we may have any plans, any type of inputs, but these will not reach them. That's the reason that RSPs or whatever organizations that I'm concerned with, the first objective was that how do we reach each and every household which is in need of, especially the poor. And that's why social mobilization was really the main factor and the main approach with which we went to the community. And today, I mean, if I look at that, we have 8.5 million rural households organized. I'm talking of urban, rural poverty, not urban. Almost 55 million people. Reason being that unless and until the interventions in the programs which are meant for them, they reach them, there's no point. I mean, these are hijacked, and then there are others who really benefit and they don't benefit. So all the programs that government is doing, or government wants to implement, I only wish that they would see that this large, massive framework of grassroots institutions, 8.5 million households, 5 million people, is there ready for them to help. They want to really use it. So most of these programs that you see, somehow or the other, I don't know why, they just lose sight of that. I think that I still remember when I was implementing the Arkan Rural Support Program and the World Bank started evaluating the program. And in the first evaluation, they said that the first 4 years of this program are the missed 4 years of all World Bank implemented programs. So the reason they gave that we go with, the World Bank goes with the blueprint, and here was a process approach. This program was reaching the people, asking them what they could do and why they are not able to do it. So I think this 8.5 million rural households, those are organized. If any program, whichever program you want to implement, whichever area you want to implement, but there is a multiplier effect. If you go to an area, for example, out of the 156 districts in the country, these organizations are present in 150. Out of 6,200 rural union councils, almost 4,700 union councils have these. So that is what I've been advocating all the time, that please involve the people. And I'm glad that Ishad was also talking of community mobilization, community involvement, because if it is for communities, if it is for the people, then without involving the community, without reaching each and every household which is in need of, your interventions are not going to have the desired impact. Now, in a situation like this, like floods, of course, we have been having all kinds of basically disasters like the earthquake in 2005 or even floods. But I've seen that where there are organized communities, things happen so quickly. And they happen in a very, very disciplined way. Otherwise, even if you send things, then what happens is that it is really sort of hijacked by few, or if it is not hijacked, there is a mob attack or something. So my submission really is that in this situation also, and wherever we are working, especially in Sindh, and Sindh is one province where the Sindh Rural Support Organization, right from the beginning, 2003, it started. Because my experience in India, when I was working there, I found that working with women produces the best results. So in Sindh, the Sindh Rural Support Organization only organizes women. And they have almost organized about almost 13 million women. And I think that if these interventions which government is planning, and I'm glad that some of the political leaders even understand, and especially in Sindh, Bilawal is one of our greatest advocates, calls it the silent revolution. So we're hoping that whatever they want to do, if they involve the communities, then it will have the desired result. But floods, like other disasters, is a situation where obviously people are in, they're in terrible adverse conditions, either on the roadside or others. So the approach has to be that, and this is where it depends on those people who have the resources, either the government or the donors or the philanthropists, that we will be very happy. Our SPs would really be very happy to partner with them, to help them to take those areas, to basically connect them with those people. Because my experience has been that unless you involve the communities, and I'm glad that Irshad was also saying that, and others also think that the community involvement is very, very important. Unfortunately, we have a very mass of communities organized in a three-tier structure. There is initially a community organization which is just about 15-20 households. And when in a village about 70-80% such households get organized, then they federate into a village organization. And when in a union council, 70-80% have such organized views, they become an LSO, the local support organization. So I'm hoping that whoever wants to deliver something for the people, they will use this delivery mechanism, because the main thing is that unless there is a receiving mechanism, delivery mechanism, most of the assistance will wither away. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm told that because of some technical issues, we are unable to get hold of Dr. Iqrar and Dr. Murray. So I'd come to Mr. Chris Kaye. Community mobilization, as you said, is very important. And when UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in his remarks on the flood situation in Pakistan, said that it is not a matter of generosity, it is a matter of justice when he was addressing the international community. Pakistan agriculture sector is suffering massively because of climate change. Even apart from the floods, in general, the climate change was affecting the seasons and the water availability, which in part is also responsible for the increasing food insecurity in the country. In ways, it is causing a massive dent on human security too. Substandard food consumption leads to health issues, malnourishment, and has been leading to stunted growth in the country for decades, basically. A country struggling with poverty anyway has to go down further in order to pay for health treatment. How does the developed world, and as the Secretary General said, as a matter of justice, how responsible does the developed world feel towards these issues of the developing countries like Pakistan, which are evidently paying a price of the transgressions and liberties that the developed countries took with the resources of the world?
Wow, what a question. As the representative of the World Food Programme in Pakistan, I'm really not qualified to answer that. But I appreciate, the sentiments of really what you're driving at with that question. But it's interesting, listening to all the speakers, and there's been quite a distinct difference in terms of the conceptual orientation that each of you have taken in addressing the fundamental reason why we're here together, which is to understand the interrelationship between poverty and food security, food insecurity. Dr. Saleri, I thought, interestingly, I think sort of really opened it up with this whole question around dignity, which I think is very, very relevant here in Pakistan, certainly. But there's no dignity in poverty at all, full stop, end of. There's no dignity without food. Food sustains us. It nourishes us. It builds communities. It's what brings families together. It brings societies together. It brings us wealth. There's not a nation on earth that hasn't really established itself and become strong, healthy, wealthy nations without having capitalized on the evolution of its agriculture and being able to ensure that its society is food secure. So we have to think about that in the context of Pakistan. We have to think about it in the context of today's world. the global food security situation is really worrisome. And we have to think about where we are in this whole conversation in the context of what's happening globally. It would be myopic not to. Because we will have another year of record hunger. There will be 345 million people across 82 countries around the globe that are facing food insecurity. Now that's up from 282 million just at the beginning of the year. Let me run that number by you again. 282 at the beginning of the year is now up to 345 million. Now, prior to COVID, that same criteria of measurement, the number was 135 million. So do you see what's happening? I mean, the numbers of hungry people across the country is growing exponentially. The number of people facing famine-like conditions. Now, we all understand famine. I mean, the F word amongst people who are involved in food security will, you don't want to use the F word, famine. But there's 10 times more people facing famine than there were 5 years ago. That's an alarming increase in its own right. And famine is a complete and utter failure on behalf of governments of the world as a whole. I mean, we should be able to halt and stop famine from occurring, but we don't seem to be able to at the moment. We've got a famine in parts of Afghanistan, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Yemen, and Somalia, particularly right now. And it's not far off stalking people here in Pakistan. We have an integrated phase classification system. Some of you may be familiar with this, but phase 5 is when it's too late. We've reached famine, when people start dying because of lack of hunger. We have 4 million people by our estimations, and that includes the extrapolation of data that we've collected through as a result of assessments responding to floods. 4 million people who are in phase 4. I was at a regional meeting last week that, and listened to the ADB, and they talked about the regional economic outlook. And yes, we're all experiencing inflation. Every country in Southeast Asia is experiencing inflation. And that's commodity prices, that's food prices. Everybody's having to tighten monetary policy. So 2023, the impact is going to be really big on all of us. And of course, the ones who are really going to be impacted most of all are, of course, the most vulnerable. And we know who those people are. They're women and they're children. And they are those people, of course, more than anything else, who are living in more often than not, in rural situations, and who struggle at the best of times to be able to put food on the plate. Now, what's interesting about Pakistan, in the experience that I've had here, it's the second time I've lived in this country. And I lived here 22 years ago. And what I've seen, though, is just how amazing the resources are and how the country has, in certain segments of society, been able to benefit and profit from the resources that the country has. But that benefit hasn't reached across all segments of society. The inequity that exists in Pakistan is shocking. And I think that we all need to understand how shocking it is. And that's something that we need to do something about. Because those people who are now suffering, and you heard the numbers from Farouk, those who are really struggling in flood-affected areas, are going to be those same very people who will be affected in next year, possibly, or at least the year after, when we have another flood, when we have another major crisis because of impacts of climate change. And why? It's because they're stuck. They're stuck in a cycle of debt. They're stuck in a cycle of poverty. And there's a societal structure that is keeping them in that situation. It's keeping them in poverty. So what's really interesting right now is that we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity in a variety of different ways. One, we have a room full of very smart, bright people. And this is the other aspect about what's extraordinary about Pakistan, is that the intellectual capacity in this country is just amazing. But we do tend to talk to ourselves, as we are doing this afternoon on the Monday. And you know, the challenge we have, I think, is to be able to take that knowledge and not just put it into policies and into nice, you know, books which people read, but actually apply them into practice. And there's a major gap in terms of implementation capability, it seems. Government understands and has known what to do in a whole variety of different areas when it comes to improving food security, food management. The management of wheat, for example, is one aspect which the World Food Programme is particularly concerned about in this country. We bought 320,000 metric tons of wheat this past 12 months. Why? In order to feed 23 million people in Afghanistan. Now, we're putting a huge amount of money into the economy of Pakistan. It's wheat that actually you can afford to sell to us. And it's great because we're actually providing to our brethren in Afghanistan who really, really need it. But what's interesting about that whole learning experience is how inefficient the manner by which wheat is collected, managed, stored, priced, and the returns are fed back to the farmers. And I've looked at some of the policies and recommendations that have been made around wheat management in this country. They go back a decade, and they've all been saying the same thing, but no one's done anything about it. No one's bothered to improve the wheat storage capability in this country in a significant way. We're still bagging it. We're still storing it into really low-cost go-downs. The amount of food losses that come as a result of that is just extraordinary. And who are the ones who are benefiting from that system? Unfortunately, it's not the consumer, nor is it the farmer. So think about that. Anyway, we have an opportunity, as I said, I think at this stage, because we're now in the process of finalizing a post-disaster needs assessment. This is exciting and very, very important. It's an important opportunity because it's not just a list of infrastructure that need to be replaced and the pricing of that infrastructure. It's a real effort to understand some of the aspects of the manner by which Pakistan's the damage that has been caused by the floods can be put back together in a better way. And it's not just about making sure that hotels aren't built on the side of riverbanks. It's a little bit more than that. It's actually thinking about maybe building back better the societal structures that can make a difference to people's lives, that can make a difference in terms of the opportunities to lift people up and out of poverty. Shoaib, I really appreciate your reflections on the importance of community development. And I agree with you 100%. But I don't think that it's a zero-sum game, as I sense by the nature of the question that was asked, when it comes to, is it this or is it social protection? I think that was what was implicit in your question, because I think the two can go together. And the social protection scheme that has been developed in Pakistan, honestly, I think is one of the best that I've seen and witnessed anywhere else in my experience around the world. And it's certainly something to hang on to and cherish and support, because I think the breadth and the depth and scope of what is captured under BISP, formerly known as ASAS, is something which can really help lift people up and out of poverty in a very meaningful way. So, but there are a number. I've spoken too much. I'm sorry, but there's a number of very obvious things which Pakistan, I think, know the answer to, and people in this room know the answer to. But I think the enormous frustration is that we don't seem to be able to really land any of this stuff in a manner which really makes a difference to people on the ground. And I think that's the thing that we really have to start seriously thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think you summed up Pakistan's problem very well. You mentioned the intellectual capacity that the country has, and then the gap in the implementation capabilities, which are resulting in shocking inequity in the country. This is what I took from it. Dr. Fateh has joined us. Dr. Fateh, thank you so much for joining us. We are almost at the end of our discussion, but since you are from Sindh and since you have a lot of experience in agriculture and you have a lot of work on food security, my question, can you hear us, sir? Oh. Yeah. Can you hear us, sir? That's very unfortunate, but I think we will go towards our audience. Some of our colleagues had very important questions, but we'll guess well his internet is having issues. Some of our colleagues had very important questions and our guest also.
Can I add what
sure.
Said a little bit and then
I think Fateh has raised his hand.
Yes, I'm hearing you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for joining us. I hope you can.
I'm hearing you.
Yes.
Yes, please. I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you.
Yeah. Sir, Sindh has been one of the worst hit provinces in Pakistan with the recent flood. And we see that it's been over 2 months now that there are places that are still flooded. And as mentioned, this is the peak time for cultivation of wheat, a staple crop, which is meeting most of the nutritional needs of the country. It is already one of the least developed provinces of the country, and the people are primarily dependent on agriculture. How far-ranging are the implications of the scenario going to be on our food security? There is still some problem with your voice. Maybe if you can close your video, it would get better. Maybe we'll go towards Mr. Irshad and we can take him later.
I will quickly comment, rather add what Chris has said. I mean, there are two ways. One is that you have to really struggle with the government to improve the systems. And the second way, which we have learned through RSPN approach, is empower the communities. So this is now a choice left for us. I'm not criticizing any aspect, but I think that only option left with us is that, yes, we have to struggle with that, improving the systems, but until we are not empowering the communities, and community, I mean at the village level, the things cannot be done the way we want. For instance, I mean, there are 0.5 million village organizations and LSOs and all that. But what my thinking and what we think in the PPF is that we need to a little bit nurture them, value add them, and we made them prepared for upcoming disasters. It could be community responses for the disaster. It can be any kind of disaster. It can be locust, it can be search and rescue, it can be cloth, it can be something with the stockpiles, it can be food item, non-food item. I think that, and then not the least, the community-based local solutions for the climate change. And unfortunately, Chris, we are really missing that. Our research is not that proactive on that end. And then if they are doing something that is really not reaching to at the village level. And therefore, those villagers, they are at the mercy of, mostly they say that that is something, a bad omen from Allah Almighty, but it is not. The actual problem is that they are not really aware how to cope it and how to respond to that situation. So what I would say that, Shoaib Saab, that we have to really build on this whole model of community-based organization, and you are the one who has done it in the Gilgit-Baltistan Chitral. Disaster risk reduction, disaster responses through communities. We can further strengthen that, and I'm sure that by doing that, we can better equip them in upcoming times. Thank you very much.
Do we still have Dr. Murray? Can we try to connect with him again? Okay. So I think we'll go towards the audience for their questions. Yes, sir.
It's been a fascinating experience listening to all the diverse and possibly divergent views. But if you look for poverty reduction in Pakistan, then poverty is caused not so much by, let's say, lack of ability to grow food and so on, but by political and social dispensation that we have. And this is the biggest factor which is hindering our growth. And this is also why so many people are migrating from rural to urban areas. Food security. We talk about the floods, but let's assume there were no floods. There was no COVID. What would happen? No change. I've been following this data for the last, let's say, 12 to 15 years. The Green Revolution is essentially over. I wish Dr. Iqrar were here and we'd have a good argument about this. With the present technologies that we employ and the present skills that we have not improved our productivity or yield or water use. I had a small part in improving water use, in improving the productivity. We've sold about 6,000 laser land levelers in Pakistan. And now people would buy 6 or 7 at one go to a farm, level the land, there was a tractor, and there was an automatic scraper with a sensor, and the laser, and what happened? Here, okay, here means the land is high, scraper changes, and it cuts or it fills. About 30 to 34% less water use, and about 18 to 19% higher yield without changing anything. So small interventions like this help, and so on. And curiously enough, I'll just share another thing with you. The people who made the tripod for us, we didn't want to make the tripod. The gentleman rang me a few years ago, it's 3 years ago, said, I have 15% of the EU market in tripods. Because our tripod is supposed to work at very low temperature, very high temperature, could drop into the water like floods. Anyway, but that's another story. So feudal landlords, the feudal system has to go. Without this, there is no change whatsoever. Also, we do not recycle any of our urban water, any water anywhere. About 500 million gallons per day coming into Karachi, not a single drop is recycled. And I think we need a water budget when we have crops grown. And according to that, you allow certain crops, you do not allow them. Why are we exporting water with the rice that we have? This Kachi Kadali was the one that went back into Balochistan. They're growing basmati rice there in the desert. What for? Also, sir, one other thing, and I'm talking too much. The 9 out of 10 climate models which predict growth in higher rise in temperature also predict that for every 1 degree centigrade rise in temperature, one corollary of that is wheat cultivation in, let's say, in Pakistan, would shift northwards by 120 kilometers for every 1 degree centigrade rise. So northern Sindh and southern Punjab will not be able to grow wheat at all a few years down the line if we are not careful. Sir, reaching the household, absolutely right. This is where the delivery of services takes place. Women-centric, wonderful. I'm worried about the funds coming in from outside. The utilization is not very efficient, and I'm sure you're aware of that. But there are, what are you mentioned a lot of numbers and so on, but let me bring in a few other factors which you did not. You mentioned Afghanistan, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen. They're facing famine. Who brought the war in there? Yeah. Not the Sudanese themselves or the Somalis themselves. So I think sometimes these big powers have to go back to their own country. You're absolutely right. Shocking inequality in Pakistan. One other thing is I found in the government, which I found most distressing. I came from the Atomic Energy Commission. So when I joined the Planning Commission, what shook me was a lack of institutional memory. Unbelievable. I never expected that in the Planning Commission about, let's say, 12, 13 years ago. So this is another big problem in Pakistan. Institutions do not remember what they've done and why they did something. And they keep on repeating it. And lastly, sir, the amount of money we spend in our PSDP, this annual program, development program, the biggest chunk of money goes for construction. The National Highway Authority is the biggest recipient of funds, and it gets about 7-8 times more than education gets in the country. And you'd be, I don't know, happy or surprised. They built this metro from Pindi to Islamabad with a budget of 48 billion rupees. This is done over 18 months, 1.5 years. This is about 11 times more than the education budget of our entire Rawalpindi and Islamabad. Just imagine, wrong priorities. I'll just stop here.
Add to his remark about the rise in temperature, and there was a question which was sent to me. How can cash crop of Pakistan be rotated to avoid risk and give breathing space to the soil? His comment also included that with every 1 degree rise in temperature, the production will go further north. Is there a possibility that that can be done? I would add to this.
Sorry, you just allow me to just finish one thing.
Sure.
One of the reasons is a part of this so-called demographics changes. It's a disaster waiting to happen. 83 million people have less than 3 years of education, and only 134 million are literate. 78% of the workforce has less than 5 years of education. Now, what do you expect? No skills. No skills. An unskilled country.
We actually also have a question with this as well.
You missed one thing. We have more agricultural universities and less research than 2 universities used to be some years ago.
Yes, absolutely right.
So let me take one more question, and then we can take your answers. Yes, Mona.
Hello. So my question is a little elaborate, so allow me to speak a little. So I think we should look at the context of farming in Pakistan. Pakistan is a post-colonial state, and we should look at what the system was inherited. During British Raj, peasants were farming for the British colonizers. And if it was not British colonizer, the same big pieces, chunks of land, especially in this area which became Pakistan, this was given to big landowners. And those landowners persisted. Even now they persist. I think that's more in Sindh side than Punjab side. But now what we see in the modern day is that farmers are first they're farming for British, then they're farming for local landlords, but now they're farming for big multinational or telecom companies. So there's almost little to no ownership of the land that they're growing crops in. So I'm not too radical here, or maybe too idealist, but I would like to take the opportunity that what's the scope of land reforms here. So perhaps we can allow our farmers to actually grow what they want to, and then give them the space to perhaps experiment with the crop, perhaps do crop rotation and implement AI technology or whatever which they think is beneficial and needed.
I think for both of these questions, we can come to Mr. Shah.
I would only comment on one thing, that majority of us always perceive climate change as a threat. But experts says that, yes, climate change is a threat, but it is an opportunity as well. But it really depends on the researchers, on the experts, how to turn those threats into a locally viable opportunity. And honestly, that is a missing gap. Why that is a missing gap? Institutions like PRC, NARC, provincial agriculture research, agriculture universities, they were the wonderful breeding ground for the research, wonderful experts, all of them, there's PhDs. And I know there are limitations, there are problems at the moment, funding, etc. But somehow everything stops there with the time. Nothing is coming up. And yes, there are some, but that's not substantial. And that's how the farmers are in a bad situation. I agree with that. So we really need to think that how, again, coming back to the local farmers, the local communities, how we need to strengthen them. We need to little bit strengthen this whole concept of SM, putting on the top of that something, a business mobilization or disaster. In disaster, we need to mobilize that. I think we really need to think on those aspects. I mean, small interventions we have done in the Gilgit-Baltistan part. I mean, I remember in Skardu, they never got a fresh vegetable in the winters. And with the passive greenhouses, under the USAID program, it revolutionized everything. Now in -17, they're getting green foliage, vegetables, and all that. Then again, the second example is the tunnel farming in Pakistan. The third example, Shoaib Sultan Sahib, is witnessed as renewable energy, which started at his time. I mean, there are great examples around. And NGOs or the development practitioners, what they can do is to create those islands, and then for sure, government is the one who can replicate it. But again, we cannot make the government all the time scapegoat. We have the parallel system. There are people who continuously need to push them. And that can be the local government or the local governance. Unless until that local governance is not strengthening, they cannot be a vital force to push the government through political way or through votes or etc. So that is my very humble submissions. Thank you.
And one other point to number I mean like to throw in. You know that if there was no flood or anything else, the typical average wastage of our food crops in the agriculture sector varies from 34 to 37% and hasn't changed in the last 15 years at all. Hasn't changed at all.
That's right. Thank you very much. Yes, in fact, there was also an aspect that Chris has touched upon, like the waste, how the food is handled after the harvesting. But then the issue is in fact quite complex. I'll touch upon like a couple of points here. Like one aspect that you rightly mentioned about the climate change and impact of climate change in Pakistan. Yes, the previous speaker was also mentioning that Pakistan is at least in the top 10 countries heading every year by many different researchers, countries affected by the impact of the climate change. And then the farming practices can no longer be effective in such a situation when the temperature is rising, when the soil conditions are changing, when the water availability is changing, when the pattern of rain is changing. So the farmers would be waking up with a surprise why this farming practice, which was effective by their predecessors for so many years, all of a sudden becomes ineffective. What needs to be done about it? Well, research. Research is something that is heavily required in such a context, whereby the more climate resilient type of farming practices should be introduced. Like, for example, this laser leveling that you mentioned is one of the very simple technologies which allows more efficient use of the resources. And also on the seed varieties and quality, because the same varieties which were effective for the previous cycles of production are no longer effective delivering those results because of the new environment, because of the new changing the climate. But then also, second aspect I would like to mention here is that the farming model, touched upon is a slightly different way, but what I would put is that if you do analysis of productivity in Pakistan, crop by crop basis, in most of the crops, our yields per hectare, per acre, whatever measurement we use,
or per unit of water,
is lower than international standards in other developed. Well, if you compare with
1/5 of Chinese, one-fifth of that
countries,
China.
yes. I was seeing that only for maize, for the corn, productivity in Pakistan was comparable with Canadian producers, with American producers, good. So that needs to be analyzed because the farming model in Pakistan quite often is not properly tailored for the type of commodities that they're producing. I will give a very simple example, wheat. Wheat in other countries is something which is produced in thousands of hundreds of hectares at the same time. It's not a commodity to be produced in a very small pieces of land like it is being done in Pakistan. So if we don't do that, the technology will not allow having high level of productivity for this commodity. Because here we rely much more on labor, on manual work, and then the losses because of the manual work will be higher. And then the varieties used, of course, is also it's only one example, but then if you go into the other crops, the same applies. Of course, there are crops which require a smaller size of farming. I don't know, like vegetables. If you give example of, I don't know, strawberry production, for example, you cannot produce it at the same time in hundreds of thousands of hectares because there's no such market to absorb such high level of production. So you need smaller size of the farming. So basically, to summarize, the size of farming is often not matching the type of commodities in context of Pakistan, and therefore that is one of the reasons for low productivity, because it doesn't allow to introduce the right technologies and techniques that in the 21st century.
Cotton is an important cash crop. Why has the cotton output gone down so drastically in the last 4 years?
Let's also take Kashif Salik's question.
So thank you very much. I think I just like to draw the panelists about the, we have discussed the economic and institutional perspective of eradication and food security. I draw some aspects of social side of this food security because it affects the social phenomena, the people, the rural poor, who is actually affecting from the poverty and food security that actually they are dealing with, or they have their impact on whatever the food shortages. So in our society, the social norms are that man has to earn and the woman has to work in the house and house chores and all this. So whenever this situation happens, that we divide the division of labor, that man has to earn and the woman has to stay at home. So unless we have integrated both the men and women earn and to support each other for financial matters, we can't eradicate poverty and food security. So social dimension, I think it's very important to highlight, and the agency of rural poor need to be highlighted in a manner that they act effectively to reduce poverty.
I'll just add to it a little, sir. You mentioned that your work with women was more effective. Is it possible, or how practical it is to involve women in rural communities through self-sufficient mechanism like skill training programs, etc.? How practical it is to elevate them out of the poverty?
Well, you might be surprised because I really experienced it in India. Because when I went there to implement the South Asia Poverty Alleviation Program, which was a UN program in Andhra Pradesh, I found that the women were capable of doing everything.
They do the sharing here, everything here.
That's what I'm saying. So when I came back, now I only work with women. I'm surprised that in Sindh, the Sindh Rural Support Organization is only working with women. We're almost organized, about 3 million of them. So, you see, what happens is that women, firstly, are thinking of the family. The men are thinking of themselves first and then doing anything. So whatever you tell them, they really adopt it and they do it. And that's the reason why this was now the rural support programs, wherever they are extending the program, it only begins with women. And one thing which I have learned is that you put money in the hands of women, the men become their subjects. That is the secret. That all the programs we have, like community investment fund and everything, which is for women, and they're the ones who really do that. But I also wanted to comment on one thing, the social protection programs that we have. The only problem, Chris, is that we think that it is the be-all and the panacea for everything. I mean, for example, look at BISP. You know how much money they've given under that? I was looking at somewhere that they've already given 667 billion, and they're continuing. Although they don't realize that this money and the people who are receiving it, they are now capable of doing bigger things, not only receiving this little sort of favor that you are doing to them.
Even I've been offered this money 3-4 times
Yes.
the last few years.
So you see, that is, I mean, all that, I mean, what we do with women now is that when they get organized, we really sit down with them, because each and every household has the potential to do something, to unleash their potential to improve their livelihood. And they know what they can do. It's not that you impose on them. I mean, the World Bank's observation that you don't go with a blueprint, but you have a process approach. And they come up with very good ideas and do all kinds of things. And I think that from social protection now, especially those which we have already given for so many years, we should now basically come to economic livelihood of the households, because they are not capable of doing that. But it's very difficult to make them understand this. They will go on giving this money and they think that we are really helping whatever number of million households that they're doing. But they are helping them almost 10%. The other way, with the same money, they can really make them almost self-reliant, and within 3-4 years will be much higher.
It's both heartening and ironic at the same time. I actually wanted to take your comments on another question as well, so you can add to it. So we are primarily reliant on the cash crops for our other economic needs, and then there are wheat crops and staple crops as well, which are, as I said earlier, vastly affected by climate shock. How can, as a part of World Food Program, do you think that there is a way to make us self-reliant and like a way to adapt or mitigate to the changes and make our crops resilient to the climate shocks?
Well, the simple answer to that question is yes, absolutely. And I think that it's not the World Food Programme alone, it's the World Food Programme with working together with FAO, working together with IFAD, the financing arm of the Rome-based agency group that deals with issues associated with support from an international perspective for food security. And undoubtedly it's working with governments, both at federal, provincial, as well as district level. You know, the integrated approach, which I heard somebody make reference to, is fundamental to our success. To be able to enable people to take on that responsibility, to have and to create that level of self-reliance, there's no question. I mean, you know, seen it, I think we've all experienced it. You go to communities in the field and that's desperate, very much exactly what people want to do. Men and women. Is to take responsibility for putting food on their table without the indignity of taking handouts. But there are people who find themselves in certain circumstances who, just simply aren't able to receive to generate the money, to get the jobs, to enable them to exist or to support and feed their families. And this is the reason why social protection systems exist. It's not to replace the idea of community development or systems of strengthening community self-reliance, but it is a safety net to be able to catch those people who otherwise were not likely to be able to survive, literally unable to survive. Now, the World Food Programme is very well aware of that, because that's fundamentally what we're best known for, is in situations of conflict, and unfortunately, majority of the people that we are there are other situations which, where there's a combination of factors which have given rise to that, and where people have sunk below a level where no longer can their communities support them, and where they really do need the handout. The indignity of a handout. And whether that comes from a government, which is the case here to some extent here in Pakistan, the 25,000 rupees, for instance, that BISP has provided to people who are affected by the floods has only reached 40% of those people who are affected. It's the lowest quintile. And in fact, I know that they originally wanted to provide for 60% of the population who were affected, and they didn't have the funds to do that. But 25,000 is less than 30,000, which is considered as the minimum expenditure basket for a family of 5. So it's not as though they're getting a huge payout by any stretch of the imagination. It's only going to last them for 1 month. So what's going to happen after that? And that's something that we're very worried about. And we're working very closely with BISP to understand, because unless they get food, perhaps from us, they will be those that fall into phase 5, the famine, and they will lose their lives. That's tragic. So you do need to have a social safety net. If the country can afford it and can put one in place, it's a very smart and sensible thing to do. And believe me, what the government is able to do with that social safety net, it's far more efficient than anything that we can put in place, and we would be doing the same thing. We'd be putting in place a mechanism whereby cash would be dispersed to the most impoverished that we have assessed, and that we would be administering that. But it's far more expensive for us to do that than it is for the government. So it's a good thing. And what the World Food Programme is doing, and a lot of other partners are doing, is basically filling the gaps as far as we can. It's a big undertaking because the needs are way in excess of what the resources are there for. But fundamentally, as I said right in my first intervention, it's not a zero-sum game. Just because you have a social protection scheme doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to commit money to support, rural development working through communities. And I think that's the kind of the impression that somehow or other we found ourselves in. There's a polemic.
All that I'm saying is that, no, I mean, for example, instead of giving them 2,000 rupees a month, it ends up to about 24,000 rupees a year. I'm saying they just have a micro investment plan with them, and maybe they only need 24,000 or even less that they will start earning. That is what they're not doing.
But the markup is very large on this microfinance, which is offered to the poor people. And I've had a run-in with the NRSP on this a few years ago when I was in the Planning Commission.
We have 2 more questions. Let's just quickly take them, and then we can have the discussion over tea.
Can I have a quick question?
Just a question.
It's not a social protection. Why you cut me last time on?
Yes, please.
Then, so you want to do it twice? I'm okay with it.
No problem. I'm sorry.
Just a quick question. There are some poverty graduation programs. Do you know?
Yep.
How much of a disaster they are?
Let's take his question, and then they can answer together.
Could I ask two very short questions?
Sure, but
my first question would be regarding the SAS program and the Benazir Income Support Program in reference to the social health protection. You mentioned the insurances. Could that be further improved in terms of, especially, regarding the flood-affected areas where the people could go to the hospitals and could much more, take benefit of this social health care protection that the Punjab government is also now promoting and the federal level is probably also thinking about. The second question is a entirely different question. I do not live in Pakistan. I live in Germany and I work for the German government, for the German parliament. I had the great honor to invite Abid Suleri a couple of times to the German parliament for a roundtable. We had recently a parliamentary committee hearing about Pakistan where the German government was very surprised to say and emphasize that Pakistan has so many resources. It has the largest agricultural fields, it has human capital, but Pakistan is somehow not able to somehow utilize its potential in a maximum way. The obstacle that were mentioned by the German government is a huge problem with feudalism, with nepotism, and a massive amount of corruption. I would like to ask you, would you share this opinion of the German government, or would you like to recommend other ways how to deal with this issue? Thank you very much.
Just take this question and you can answer them.
Thank you so much. My name is Munir Ahmed. And just like two small observations and questions as well. First one is, as Shoaib Sultan Khan said, we have dished out so many $1 million, in social protection, and every month we give X amount to a family. If we give for 6 months or a year amount that we have to, we can develop a micro enterprise for the family. And I think Pakistan, all the parts of Pakistan is very conducive for such kind of micro enterprises as well. And it would certainly help communities and the vulnerable groups to become self-reliant. One. Second, we just mentioned about community, the role of communities, strengthen the empowered communities. And food insecurity and floods, they are multiplied by the incapacity of the communities. Why don't we take those communities into the system? We all know our local governance system is very weak, and we could not go to community-based disaster risk management as well, despite many promises and commitments for many years now. I don't know how the panel would respond to it. Thank you.
Asha, if I may. Thanks for the question, but if we can request either Dr. Pervez Tahir, former Chief Economist of Pakistan, or Dr. Saab, former Member Planning Commission, to respond on the perception of Pakistan in the external world. I think rather than asking this question to the panelists, from your own experience sitting in the government and why this sort of perception is now there externally, if any of the two gentlemen would like to respond.
I have a one-liner. The externals taught us that.
The what?
Externals taught us that. Taught us that.
May I say here?
Externals taught us that. Taught us that.
Let me just bring 3 points to your attention. Cotton. Has anybody examined why our cotton production has gone down? From 15 million bales to now it's about 9. It's recovered to 9. It had gone down to 8. Maybe it's 10 million this year. It used to be never more than 3 million. I'm speaking from the point of view of my old organization, the Atomic Energy Commission, that the first cotton seeds, genetically modified, came out of our nuclear institute in Faisalabad. And within 4 years, it had jumped from 3 to 9 million bales. Stayed there, then slightly went up. The biggest contributor to cotton development was NIAB, Atomic Energy's agriculture lab. Now, you know why it has gone down? Monsanto. Why Monsanto? Monsanto offered genetically, BT cotton, genetically modified, what you call resistant to pests and so on, to India. And what happened was that hundreds of farmers there committed suicide because the opposite happened. And so the Indian government has sued them for several $1 billion. I'm thinking of for 4 years ago. And now what has happened? That is also about the time when BT cotton Monsanto started coming into Pakistan. It was banned in India. It came here. Now, food spoilage, I said 36% is wasted. And you talk about health. 80% of cancer patients in the country are treated by the 29 or 30 odd nuclear medical centers of the Atomic Energy Commission. Shaukat Khanam is where you have all the news. But it's the NMRs, the nuclear medical centers, NMCs, the PAC, we do most of the treatment. About Somalia, one small side comment. Please don't mind it. You know why the Somalian pirates, fishermen turned to piracy? Fishing. Why? Because the French nuclear waste was buried off the coast of the sea. This is what happened and caused a disaster to the fish population. A lot of other things that one can talk about, but I did a little thing in the food area. We have a place called Paras in Lahore, Pakistan Radiation Services. They reported to me a little late when I was much older. And I had left my lab work and was doing peer administration. And they sort of, what do you call this, what's the word for it, when you disinfect, no, you something do to all medical products. And 95% of the disinfection is done by radiation. And more than half the items come from Karachi to this place. Now, this can also be used for another activity, agriculture. So I made a proposal. Agriculture Ministry agreed. We shared 50-50, Atomic Energy and the Agriculture Ministry. We started this radiation activity. And you can, next time to preserve crops and food. And you do not need to do that at very low temperatures, like 2 degrees, 3 degrees, these cold houses. You can do this at 15, 16 degrees centigrade. Next time you go to the USA and have a mango, it's probably a Brazilian mango, and it's come through Chicago airport, and it's been irradiated before it enters the market. So I did this here in Lahore. I took mangoes, would have normally had 3 days, 4 days life, just the right dose, like the Chinese do or the Americans do, and had them sent off by road and shipped to the Middle East, 40 days shelf life before they started going back. And you can do this in a very big way to solve food spoilage problem. Sorry, just stop here.
Just have one last comment.
Yeah, just last comment. One thing we need to really think as a nation, that why we stuck with the high water intensity crops, cotton, sugarcane, why that is in our mind all the time. Why we are not really thinking of crop substitution, and where those researchers are, why they are not working on crops like tolerant crops,
drought resistant
crops. Yes. One, I was presenting something. I mean, in the mountainous region, I was the one who presenting the KP policy, agriculture livestock KP policy, and the chief minister. I mean, we were talking of production in the mountainous region. And he said, what the hell you want to take out from these small lands? Why are you talking of the production? Why not this place can be a seed house? So I think we need to come out of those thinking of production.
Hasn't the seed house activity started there?
Yes, they started in some eco zones. But my point here is that we need to really come out of that typical tunnel thinking and really can move forward. We as a nation are the great expert we have, and we can move forward, inshallah. I mean, why we are relying all the time on external experts? Yes, sure. I mean, their help will be ultimately needed in one way, but why 100% reliance? And why, I mean, sorry, why someone can taught us? Why taught? So these are some questions as a
university, so that's why.
I mean,
No, I'm sorry, I don't agree with
no, but university, there is another problem with the university, and they have a wonderful Taipan project in KP, where they have tried to merge extension, research with university. But you know what happened? Internal conflicts. Promotion, grade, and this whole thing's gone off.
Let's discuss this further over tea. If I may say so myself, this was one of the most interesting discussions that I have attended post-COVID. I hope we would be able to draw some substantial recommendations out of this discussion. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists and the audiences as well. Please join us outside for the tea. Thank you.